Hell Hath No Fury, Like a Policewoman Scorned is the 7th episode of the 2nd season of Wings, and it's a really good episode. I don't have too many thoughts with this one. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. This one, I enjoyed it all, and we have our main narrative and then a small subplot. So instead of going through things chronologically, I'll just deal with the subplot first of all, and then I'll get in with the main narrative. And the small subplot is actually very entertaining. And this involves Lowell trying to make a wacky video for America's Wackiest Videos. And he tries various things to no avail, and it's pretty good fun. I loved Roy having fun with this. I should point out there will be spoilers in this discussion from now for things that happen in this episode. And the thing that I want to spoil here about this part of the episode is when Lowell said nothing wacky ever happens around here. He leaves the room and this beautifully executed wacky chain of events happens. The whole thing must last about 3 seconds, but it's so fabulously done and so funny, and it's even funnier because Lowell didn't capture it on video. The main narrative involves a character called Officer Colleen Thomas, played by Sharon Barr, and it starts off with Joe getting arrested because of multiple unpaid parking violations. And it turns out that actually these are from Brian whenever Brian borrows Joe's car. And the officer decides to unhandcuff Joe if Brian stops talking, because Brian's trying to talk Joe's way out of the situation. And the handcuffs are off, and the officer seems to think that Brian was coming on to her, and she kind of forces a date with Brian, and Brian goes on this date, and then we cut to the next day, and it turns out the date was terrible. He got to see a body in the morgue. It couldn't have been that bad, but he then decided it's over, it's done with, I had the date, I've done this for Joe, even though technically it's his fault anyway. It's over. And then Faye comes out with a teddy bear dressed as a police officer, and I want one. It is the cutest thing ever, and it's clear that Colleen does not think that this was just a one-date thing. And Brian tries to break it off with her when she comes over, and he can't tell her the truth. So he tells her that he's actually in a relationship with somebody else, and he points to Helen. And immediately I thought this was a terrible idea for Brian to do, because this officer is clearly unhinged. And there was that moment where I feared for Helen's safety, and rightly so, because Colleen starts to do all of these horrendous things to Helen, like smashing in her tail light, and Helen decides to give as good as she gets and play Brian at his own game. And I loved this. I thought this was a really brilliant direction for it to go in. Instead of Helen getting mad at the situation, she just got even, and she told Colleen that she knows about Brian and Colleen's date, and that she can have him. And there's no way Brian can get out of that situation except tell her the truth. And he does, he tells her the truth. And then Roy does this brilliant thing where he turns himself in for 200 unpaid parking tickets. And it seems like that would be the end of it. Colleen took things unusually well. And then cut to the final scene. And at this point, I think it's clear that something has happened. We know that Joe is going to talk to Brian, but it's unclear what. And I don't remember the first time I watched this. One of the great things of having a terrible memory is that I can rewatch an episode, and a lot of it is still an element of surprise, and this is what we get here. I don't think I ever would have guessed that Brian would have been hanging upside down by his feet. But it worked very, very well, and I think it was a good way to end the episode. So it's definitely an entertaining episode. Maybe not a personal favourite, but there's nothing about it that didn't work. I think Colleen is a really interesting character, really great performance, and Lowell's story as well definitely added some really fun padding to the main narrative. It may not be a personal favourite, but Hell Hath No Fury, Like a Policewoman Scorned is still one that I really thoroughly enjoyed.